Fawn is an orphan nobody hell-bent on making a name for himself with the help of his pet whale. He has spent countless years clawing his way to the top, but just when his dream is about to come true, he is killed by his own pet and reborn as a penniless, ugly loser. When Fawn opens his eyes, he finds himself in the middle of the forest, and miraculously he is still in one piece, although his clothes are different for some reason. He checks himself to see if he is still bonded with his whale, Nian, but sadly, it looks like his pet is gone for good. For now, he needs to figure out where he is and think of a way to get home, so he stumbles down to a nearby river to get a drink of water. However, when he sees his reflection in the water, he realizes that his face is way uglier than it used to be. He starts panicking and tries to figure out what could have caused this, but all the commotion draws attention to him, and eventually, a group of armed soldiers track him down. Fawn is confused and wonders why soldiers showed up all of a sudden, but before he could even say a word, they all draw their swords on him and take him into custody. Before all this, Fawn used to be the leader of the fast-growing Lianxiao Pavilion sect, and his only dream in life was to raise his sect to A class in the league rankings, and he was really close to achieving that dream. All he needed to do was win his next match in the sect tournament to prove himself. On the day of the tournament, as Fawn was leaving for the tournament, he was greeted by all his sect members, and they all wished him luck in his upcoming battle. Fawn thanked them for their support, but he needed to hurry so he wouldn't be late for his match. The A-Class promotion tournament is a big deal on this continent, so there are many influential people here who are against the idea of an unknown sect like Fawn's being allowed to participate. However, there are also people who are in favor of his participation, like the master of the Bai family. He knows that Fawn was originally born into a very reputable family that tragically met its end years ago, leaving Fawn as the only survivor. Yet despite this setback, Fawn was able to build a new sect from the ground up, and in just a few short years, his Lianxiao Pavilion has already risen to B class. Such rapid growth is almost unheard of, but the reason Fawn is so strong is because he has a deep and profound understanding of the spiritual pets that exist in this world. Soon the tournament begins, so Fawn steps out into the arena, and with a wave of his hand, he summons his giant whale pet, Nian. His opponent is impressed by Fawn's display because it is clear that he has put a lot of work into cultivating his pet, but he isn't the only one with an impressive pet. Master Han clasps his hands to form a ball of fire, and from that fire, he summons his giant ape pet so he can compete on equal ground with Fawn. He is eager to see what Fawn can do, so as the match begins, both pets charge at each other and clash in the middle of the ring. The ape delivers a devastating uppercut to Nian, but Nian quickly recovers and retaliates with a high-pressure water blast. Fawn then instructs Nian to attack Hong directly, so Hong is forced to run and dodge until the ape grabs Nian by the mouth and starts swinging it around the stadium. The organizers really should have invested in a barrier or something because the wind from Nian's tail alone is causing a lot of trouble for the spectators, and when the ape throws the whale, it totally would have squished all those people if Fawn hadn't regained control in time. He then flies into the air with Nian and prepares to use one of his special moves, but Hong was expecting it, so as Nian water attacks, Hong and his ape are able to block and evade with ease. The ape then flies into the sky, and it must have filled its ultimate bar or something because it unlocks a new form and throws a fire fist straight at Fawn and Nian. Some of Fawn's supporters are starting to get worried because that giant fist looks pretty intimidating, but Fawn isn't worried. He came into this fight fully aware of how skilled Hong is, however he's still confident that he can win because he has a special trick up his sleeve. He performs a technique to ascend his whale to its second form, and as the fire fist approaches, Nian swallows a whole. The ape keeps attacking, but with Fawn's skill, Nian is able to swallow the energy of all the attacks until it finally spits it back at the ape. But just when it looked like Fawn was about to win, something strange began happening to Nian. Its body began to decay right before Fawn's eyes, and it suddenly started rampaging through the stadium. Fawn has no idea what's going on, but he can't let Nian hurt innocent people, so he tries to cancel his summon. But for some reason it isn't working, and as soon as Nian realizes that Fawn is trying to unsummon it, it turned towards around and swallowed Fawn whole. Back to the present, Fawn ended up getting locked away in a dungeon, but on his way here, he managed to gather some useful information. It has been a year since the incident at the sect tournament, so the whole world believes that Fawn lost his life to his own pet. And technically speaking, they are right. Fawn indeed died that day, but before the tournament, he received a forbidden scroll from a mysterious masked man. The man informed him that this is a reincarnation scroll, and if Fawn were to suffer a fatal injury while in possession of this scroll, then a year later, the scroll will transport his soul into the body of a healthy person who recently died. That means the previous owner of this body died in that forest, at which point Fawn's soul took over, but Fawn still has no idea who the original owner of this body was or what crime he committed to make him a wanted man. Fawn is also curious about the circumstances that led to his death because his whale had never disobeyed him before, so someone must have sabotaged him. Either way, he's going to need to get out of here if he wants to gather more information, so he tries summoning the spiritual pets of this body to see if they can help. However, all he gets is a poodle and a cactus. This isn't looking good for him, but he wants to remain optimistic, so he asks them to show him their special abilities. However, much to Fawn's disappointment, the only special move the poodle knows is how to piss on the floor. As for the cactus, it can create long vines which it can then use to restrain people, and thankfully this ability seems somewhat useful, but there's no way he can escape like this. A few moments later, Fawn hears a guard approaching, so he tells the pets to return to his body before they get caught. The guard opens the cell door and tells Fawn that Miss Bai wants to see him in her chambers, but as soon as the guard sets foot in the cell, he is revolted by the stench of the poodle piss on the ground. Fawn tries to cover it up and says he was the one who pissed on the floor, but considering the distance, the guard finds that hard to believe. However, it's not the guard's job to worry about where Fawn pisses, so he tells him to just hurry up because Bai is waiting for him. Along the way, Fawn tries asking the guard why this bad lady wants to see him because considering how he was arrested, he is worried that he might get tortured, but the guard doesn't answer any of his questions. They eventually arrive at Bai's room, so the guard knocks on the door and tells her that he has brought the prisoner as she requested. Bai is pleased, so she tells the guard to leave Fawn here and return to his duties, but while the guard wasn't paying attention, Fawn managed to untie his hands. Although his chances of escaping still aren't great, so he pretends that he is still restrained. He then walks into Bai's room and finds her waiting for him while she drinks a cup of tea. She calls him Liu Fengmeng, which is the name of the original owner of this body, and asks him if he knows why she chose to keep him alive. Fawn has no idea what Liu did to make someone like Bai mad, so he tries playing it safe and asks if she's going to give him a second chance to make up for his mistakes. However, the mistake in question is the fact that Liu grabbed Bai's melons in front of all the members of her sect. Fawn had nothing to do with that, but Bai doesn't know he reincarnated into Liu's body, and even if he told her, she probably wouldn't believe him anyway, so he tries apologizing to see if she will forgive him. However, Bai has no intention of forgiving him. She tells him that the only reason he isn't dead already is because she wants to make him suffer the same humiliation she felt, so she plans to make Fawn her slave and mess with him for the rest of his life. Fawn really doesn't like the sound of that, so he starts slowly backing away from Bai while trying to convince her that he would be a terrible slave. He eventually makes it to the door and he thinks he might actually be able to get away, but just as he is about to leave, Bai says she never gave him permission to go outside, so as punishment, she attacks him with her spiritual pet. Fawn manages to block the initial attack, but then Bai sends her snake out to attack him in its true form. Bai is disappointed that Fawn died so quickly because she thinks there's no way he could have survived, but it turns out that Fawn is still in one piece, and he has brought out his pets so he can fight back. Although the sight of such weak-looking pets makes her laugh, she can't believe Fawn really thinks a pet like that can stand up to her snake, so she intends to prove her superiority and orders the snake to attack. Fawn needs to do something too, so he orders the poodle Juan to charge forward. At first it looks like Juan is doomed to become snake food, but then Fawn takes control of Juan's movements and all of a sudden he's breaking ankles left and right. Bai can't believe that a poodle is actually outrunning her snake, but Fawn has even more tricks up his sleeve. The cactus is in position, so Fawn gives the order for it to catapult itself at Bai's snake, while Juan has it distracted. The cactus launches itself right into the side of the snake's head, and now both Juan and the cactus are running around and confusing the snake. Bai is amazed that Fawn is capable of controlling two pets at the same time with such skill, but she still has a plan in mind. She tells her snake to spin around really fast to knock Juan and the cactus away, and once the snake is free from the cactus's vines, it follows it through the air and eats it. Bai celebrates because she thinks she has won, but this was actually all part of Fawn's plan, so he takes control of the cactus, and from inside the snake's mouth, he ties the snake up. And for some reason, the snake is enjoying it. Now that the snake has been restrained, Fawn tells Juan to use his ultimate move, so Juan runs up the snake's body and pisses all over the snake and Bai. Bai can't believe Fawn just did that, and she is so enraged that she activates her snake's second phase just to get her revenge. All of a sudden, Bai's snake engulfs itself in fire to burn the vines, and the cactus is nearly scorched to death as a result. The snake then swats Juan away, and he's down for the count, so Fawn recalls both of them to make sure they don't die. And now that Fawn's pets are out of the way, Bai decides to target Fawn as well, so her snake lunges forward, knocking him into the water. Fawn is on the verge of drowning, and he's starting to worry that he might die here. But then he notices something swim past his face, and it gives him a good idea. Back on the surface, Bai is using some of the pond water to wash the dog piss off her shoes when suddenly Fawn pops out of the water. She is surprised because she thought he would have drowned by now, but it looks like Fawn bonded with a catfish in the pond and made it one of his pets. Bai mocks him for being so desperate because everyone knows a catfish is an unreliable pet. Sure, it can be cultivated into a near-invincible whale, but after one of the whales went rogue and killed its master, its species was given the title of Master Killer. Fawn tries to tell her it wasn't the whale's fault and that someone sabotaged it, but Bai has no reason to believe him. And even if she did, it's not like it would change anything because all the catfishes in the nation have been exterminated under the League's orders. The only reason there's a catfish here is because Bai's brother likes to collect pets from extinct species, and this may very well be the last catfish on the continent. Besides, the only one who knows how to bring out the true potential of the catfish is the master of the Lingxiao Pavilion, but he's long dead, so catfishes are practically useless now. Fawn refuses to listen to Bai's catfish slander any longer, so he tells her to shut up, and Bai takes offense to this, so she decides to finish him off on the spot. She sends her snake after Fawn, but Fawn is able to catch its fangs and hold it in place long enough for his new catfish to get into position. Nyan swims through the air until it is behind the snake, and on Fawn's command, it bites down on the snake's tail and begins sucking. Bai can't believe what she's seeing because the only one capable of such a technique is the deceased master of the Lingxiao Pavilion, yet Fawn's catfish manages to suck her snake until it has been completely devoured. Now, Bai is completely defenseless, and she has no means to stop Fawn from escaping anymore, so he gets out of the pond and makes a run for it. Before long, the guards from Bai's family are alerted of Fawn's escape, so some wolves are sent out after him. And if you've ever been chased by wolves, you'd know it's not very fun. Fawn has managed to evade capture so far, but he won't last much longer, so as he approaches the edge of the mountain, he comes up with a daring idea. He's going to jump. He knows there's no way the guards will be crazy enough to jump after him, but he still needs to think of a way to survive the fall, so he summons Cactus and uses its vines to grab onto the peak of one of the rock formations. He then uses his momentum to swing himself all the way up onto the next mountain, and with the distance between them, the guards stand no chance of catching Fawn now. The guards spend the entire night looking for Fawn, but they can't find him, so the next morning they return to Bai's compound to tell her the bad news. They couldn't find so much as a footprint anywhere on the mountain, so they believe Fawn might have fallen to his death at some point. However, Bai doesn't seem so convinced. Fawn completely disgraced her, so there's no way she can just accept that he died in the mountains. She yells at her guards for being unreliable and demands that they go out and keep looking for Fawn because she wants him dead or alive. Just then, Bai's brother arrives because he heard news of the incident that happened here, so he asks Bai to tell him the name of the man who caused all this trouble. Meanwhile, Fawn wakes up to a bird standing on his face and he is perfectly fine, but he was really hoping that everything that happened last night would turn out to be a dream. Back at Bai's house, she has just finished telling her brother everything that Fawn did to her, including the fact that he used a catfish to devour her snake. She pleads with her brother to avenge her, but Bai's brother couldn't care less about her petty grudge against Fawn. He is much more upset at the fact that Fawn stole the limited edition catfish that he got for his rare species collection. Bai gets mad that her brother isn't taking her seriously, and she's upset that he didn't offer her the catfish when it's so strong. However, Bai's brother tells her the catfish species isn't particularly strong. In fact, there's nothing special about it aside from the innate ability to devour things, but it only works on targets that are idle for a certain amount of time. Even when it evolved into a whale, it isn't especially powerful, so by all metrics, catfishes are completely useless in combat, but there's one exception to that rule. A catfish under the control of Master Fawn Lingxiao can be incredibly formidable, but that man is dead, and no one knows the secrets of his technique. Speaking of Fawn, he is currently cultivating the catfish on the mountaintop while thinking about all the events that led him here. He failed to achieve his goals in his past life, and the entire legacy he worked so hard to build has been ruined by that incident. However, he refuses to give up, and no matter how long it takes, he swears he will rise to the top of the League and prove himself to the world. And the first step in Fawn's plan is to reunite with his sect members, so he heads to one of the League's branches and asks to rent out the fastest pet they have. Normally, you would have to pay a large sum to rent out fast pets like a shadow panther or a blue hedgehog, but Fawn says his pavilion has a contract with the League, so he's allowed to rent out pets for free. The attendant is more than happy to help, but he is going to need to confirm which pavilion Fawn belongs to, so he asks him to perform his pavilion's signature dance. Fawn was really hoping he wouldn't have to do this because the dance is really embarrassing, but he swallows his pride and performs it anyway. The attendant thinks it's hilarious, but Fawn tells him to just hurry up and look for his pavilion's listing already. However, when the attendant finally finds it, he tells Fawn that the Lianxiao Pavilion has been removed from the members' list. Fawn died in May last year, and as a result of the death of its master, the Lingxiao Pavilion was demoted to C class. Then a few months later, the League issued an order to exterminate all catfish pets, and since the catfish was the pavilion's signature pet, it was demoted yet again to D class. Finally, a few months after that, they were attacked and robbed by mass sects, and due to the heavy losses that the pavilion suffered, they were subsequently removed from the League registry. Fawn can't believe all that happened in the span of a single year, but if all this is true, then he needs to hurry back to the pavilion as fast as this pig can take him. But before that, he needs to stop at a pet service center so he can take care of Tuan and Cactus. Fawn arrives at the service center, and upon entering, he goes to talk to one of the receptionists at the front desk. She asks him how she can help, so Fawn explains that 2 of his pets were severely injured a while ago, so he would like to get them fixed up as soon as possible. The receptionist takes his pets and tells Fawn he can come back to pick them up later on, so Fawn decides to do a little more shopping. He goes to buy a defense scroll so he can train his pets, and luckily, he managed to arrive just in time to receive the final defense scroll that the shop had in stock. However, just before the clerk could hand it to Fawn, a man walks in with a tied-up girl and demands to buy the scroll instead. The clerk apologizes for the inconvenience, but Fawn was here first and store policy says it's first come, first served. The man doesn't like being told no, so he becomes belligerent and threatens to burn Fawn to a crisp if he doesn't get what he wants. This is really bad for Fawn since he doesn't have his pets with him to defend himself, but just before Xu could begin his attack, he recognizes the face of Liu, and he was apparently good friends with him before Fawn took over. He pulls up a chair and asks how Liu has been since it has been a few days since he last heard from him, but Fawn doesn't want to explain that Xu's friend is actually dead and he took over Liu's body, so he makes up a fake story and says he has been sleeping at home. He wants to end this conversation as soon as possible so he doesn't get himself into trouble, but all of a sudden, Stu asks Liu if something is wrong with him, because the Liu he knows would never pass up an opportunity to drink, so it's odd that he hasn't even attempted to down any liquor yet. Fawn tries to make up an excuse and claims that he just drank too much last night, so he doesn't feel like drinking anymore, but Xu refuses to take no for an answer. He says hanging out is no fun unless they both get drunk together, and in fact, he makes a bet with Fawn and says that if he can beat him in a drinking competition, then Xu will give Fawn whatever he wants. Fawn doesn't have much of a choice here, so he decides to go along with it and hesitantly takes a bowl of alcohol to drink. The reason he is so hesitant to drink any alcohol is because in his past life, whenever he drank even a single glass of alcohol, he would turn into a bumbling idiot and would constantly humiliate himself. However, this time, even after downing dozens of drinks, Fawn is perfectly fine, but Xu, on the other hand, is totally wasted. Fawn is surprised that Liu's body has this much resistance to alcohol, but that aside, he clearly won the bet, so he tells Xu that he will be leaving now, and he is taking the scroll with him. Xu has no complaints since he is too drunk to care. But as Fawn is walking away, he notices the girl who Xu was treating as a slave, and he feels bad for her, so he decides to set her free. He takes the bag off her head, and as he is untying her, he warns the girl to stay away from people like Xu, because they are bad news. Fawn later leaves the service center because he has business to attend to, and now that he has taught his whale a defensive bubble skill, and he has healed the other 2, he is prepared to pay some old friends of his a visit, but as he is leaving, the girl he saved from Xu seems to be watching him. Meanwhile, over in the Lianxiao Pavilion, Guling rushes into Duan Yi's room to warn him that some people have come to attack them. Duan takes the threat very seriously, so he runs outside and finds a gang of miscreants just standing there menacingly. The leader of the gang says that it would be a shame to waste such prime real estate like this on the likes of the pavilion, so from this day forth, he claims this land will belong to his Hard Rock gang. And if the pavilion members want to live, they had better pack up and leave before he loses his patience. The gang leader seems really confident that he won't challenge because the Lingxiao Pavilion is in severe decline, but Duan Yi tells them that just because their status has dwindled doesn't mean they are weak. He summons his shade cat Jaime, and 2 of the gang members try to attack him with their lizard and porcupine. So they make the lizard launch the porcupine at the cat. However, Jaime is simply too fast, so she jumps out of the way, and as soon as she gets the opportunity, she dices the porcupine into pieces. The lizard then tries to attack her, but it's too slow, so she's able to sneak up behind it and slice its tail off. The gang leader is starting to get mad, so he decides to use his own beetle pet to attack since it is fast, but apparently it wasn't fast enough because Jaime rips right through its body in an instant. Duan begins insulting the gang for thinking they were strong enough to defeat his shade cat, but while Duan is monologuing, the leader secretly instructs the beetle to fire its horn, but not at Duan. Instead, he aims straight for Guling to make Duan and Jaime lose their focus. Jaime immediately rushes back to save Guling and destroys the horn, but in the process she lets her guard down, so the lizard is able to sneak up from behind and chomp down on Jaime's body. Meanwhile, Fawn has just arrived at the pavilion and he is glad to finally be home. But he is a bit shocked by how decrepit this place has become in the year he was gone. None of the maintenance work has been done and the front gates are wide open, but that's the least of the problems here. He hears a commotion in the courtyard, so he goes to check it out, and to his horror, he finds a lizard chewing down on Jaime's body. The lizard then throws Jaime away once it is done with her, and Duan jumps into the air to catch her body, but he ends up crashing into a pot as a result. Duan begs Jaime to hold on so he can get her treated, but it's already too late. She has lost so much blood that there's no chance of recovering, and a few moments later, Jaime dies in Duan's arms. Now all the pets of the pavilion members have been killed, leaving them completely defenseless, so the gang leader orders everyone to get out of here immediately, or he might consider doing something terrible to them. As he says this, he starts reaching for Gu Ling, but before he could hurt her, his lizard gets splashed with a strange yellow liquid. The gang leader looks up to see where the liquid came from, and he finds Juan standing on one of the rooftops, but he has no idea how a little pup managed to get here. Just then, Fawn announces himself and asks the gang leader what he thinks he is doing here, but the gang leader tells Fawn to mind his own business because he thinks Fawn is some random nobody who wants to play hero. But when Gu Ling looks at the stranger, something about him reminds her of her former master. Fawn refuses to let a bunch of gang members take over the land he worked hard to earn, so he sends one in to attack, but the gang leader thinks Fawn must be stupid because there's no way a puppy could ever compare to a dragon lizard. He sends his lizard out to cut Juan down, but to his surprise, Juan is actually able to parry the attack. This makes no sense to him because the lizard should be several times stronger than the puppy, but the surprises don't end there because Fawn instructs Juan to use his new special move, so he runs forward and headbutts the lizard in the stomach. The gang leader can't believe a puppy actually managed to defeat his dragon lizard, but it was all thanks to Fawn's careful planning. Juan's urine attack is called Feeble Urine, and it has the ability to make anyone who gets covered in it several times weaker, so as soon as the lizard got sprayed at the start of the fight, Fawn had already won. The gang leader still doesn't understand how this could have happened to him, but he refuses to lose after coming this far, so he orders all his men to summon their backup pets. The gang members do as instructed, and they plan to attack Fawn directly to make him pay for humiliating them, but Fawn isn't too worried. He pretends to be scared and runs out of the gate to lure the pets outside, and the gang members eagerly follow him because they think they really have Fawn cornered. However, when they get outside, they can't find Fawn, and they realize all their pets are gone. Just then, Fawn speaks up and tells Nyan to thank the kind men for giving him so many tasty pets to eat, and as soon as the gang members realize that Nyan is a catfish, they start freaking out. The League ordered all catfishes to be exterminated months ago, so they threaten to report Fawn for possessing a catfish, but Fawn threatens to just have Nyan eat them alive if they report him, so the gang members apologize for their earlier statements and leave because they don't want to die. Once the gang members are gone, Hu Ling comes out because she wants to thank Fawn for all his help. However, to her surprise, as soon as Fawn sees her, he gives her a big hug, saying he missed her a lot. Of course, Gu Ling still has no idea who this guy is, if she doesn't know how to react to this sudden hug. She asks Fawn if she has met him somewhere before, so he's about to explain that he is Master Fawn Lian Xiao, and that he reincarnated into this body, but then he remembers what happened with his whale. Someone must have sabotaged him that day to get him killed, and he still has no idea who did it, so until he finds more clues, he can't reveal his true identity to anyone. He decides to introduce himself as Liu Fengmeng for now and apologizes for hugging Gu Ling out of nowhere, but now that the bandits are gone, he tells Gu Ling that they need to go check on the others inside. Gu Ling is certain that she has never met Liu before, but every time she looks at him, he exudes the same aura as her master, and she can't figure out why. As Fawn walks back in, Gu Ling introduces him to everyone as the man who saved them from the gang members, but while they are all grateful after everything that has happened, none of them are in much of a talking mood. Especially Duan after Jaime's death. Jaime was the first pet he ever received from Fawn, so they've been practically inseparable for years, but now that she's gone, Duan sees no reason to continue being a pet cultivator, so he says he is leaving. Fawn remembers how Duan was the first person to join his pavilion back when Fawn first established it, and even though Fawn was a new master at the time and had no achievements under his belt, Duan still believed the pavilion could become one of the best on the continent, but all that has changed now. All the other pavilion members also lost their pets in the battle, so there's no point in remaining here any longer. Fawn tries to stop him and says he can help them rebuild, but Duan laughs in his face and asks what a stranger like him could possibly do to help them. Gu Ling begs Duan not to go because they still need to carry on their master's will, but Duan reminds her that Fawn Lian Xiao is dead, and he was the only thing holding the pavilion together. so without him, they are nothing. One by one, the other pavilion members also begin walking out because there's nothing left for them here, and they've lost all will to keep fighting. Fawn pleads with them to wait because if they just give him some time, he is sure he can resolve all their problems and restore the pavilion to its former glory. But none of them have any faith in him, so as much Fawn doesn't want to accept it. This truly is the end of the Lingjiao Pavilion. By the next morning, there are only 3 members left in the pavilion, and Gu Ling is saddened by the way things turned out. After their master's death, Duan was next in line to become the master of the pavilion because he had the greatest skills among all of them. But now that he has quit, they need to appoint a new master, and Tsai knows the perfect person for the job. At first, Fawn thinks she is referring to him, but Tsai was actually talking about appointing Gu as the new master of the pavilion, who doesn't think she's qualified to hold such a position. But since everyone insists on it, she agrees to become the master for now. Gu's picture is then put up under the master plaque, and as the new master, the others ask her what the next step for their pavilion will be. Before Gu could even say anything, Fawn speaks up and says they need to go catch some more spirit pets, but then he remembers that he isn't the master here anymore, so he apologizes for speaking out of turn. Gu agrees with Fawn's plan since all of the pavilion's pets were killed during the attack yesterday, so she pulls out a map so she can find a good place to start searching for pets. However, all the good habitats on the map have already been picked clean, so there's no way they can find any good pets nearby. Just then, Fawn speaks up and says he has a good place in mind, so later that day, everyone follows him to the secret habitat he was talking about. But when they get there, it's more crowded than Walmart on Black Friday. There's no way they'd be able to find any good pets here, but Fawn tells them this isn't the place he was talking about. He leads them further into the forest, and after making sure they weren't followed, Fawn jumps off the edge of the cliff. The others are worried that he might have hurt himself, but Fawn is perfectly fine and tells them to come down as well. He uses cactus to carefully lower everyone into the ravine, and there he shows them the entrance to his secret habitat. It is an underground cave, and since no one else should know about it yet, Fawn is confident that the Lord should still be here. Chexa gets confused when Fawn mentions a Lord, so he explains that Lord is the title given to some pets depending on their innate strength. For example, if a cat and a tiger were both level 3, then the tiger would still be stronger than the cat. Most of the pets around here are soldier class, so they are rather timid, but Lord class pets are very aggressive, so he warns everyone to be careful if they encounter one. Just then, Yui spots a flaming pet in the distance, so she asks Fawn what class it is. After taking one look, Fawn can tell that it is a 3-tailed firefox, but for a firefox to have 3 tails, it would need to be in the second phase of soul bonding, which means this fox has a master and its master must be nearby. Fawn immediately warns everyone to be careful because there's someone else in this cave, but before any of them can respond, Fawn gets attacked from behind. He managed to avoid getting hit, but the attacker tells him and the others that this is his turf, and if they don't leave right now, he will show them no mercy. He is trying to scare them away so he can capture the Lord for himself, but Fawn simply laughs in his face and says he could never beat them in a fight with his weak little fox. The others join in and say they could wipe the floor with the guy's pet without even breaking a sweat, but remember, none of them have any pets right now, so they are totally bluffing. Getting into a fight right now would be terrible, so Fawn came up with a plan and told everyone to pretend to be strong and bloodthirsty so they can scare him off. And the plan is working perfectly, mostly because the guy was weirded out by Xi's tonguing, but either way it was enough to get Su to rethink his actions, so he decides to leave Fawn's group alone. Just then, Fawn feels an ominous pressure in the cave, and so he tells the others that the Lord has appeared. But before they could even think of a plan of action, Su and his firetails start running straight for the Lord. Fawn and the others chase after him, and when they finally reach the Lord, Fawn warns them to be careful, because it looks like it is in the mature stage, meaning it already has a unique skill. Su tells the others to stay out of his way while he subdues the panda, and Fawn doesn't intend to interfere since Su technically got here first. Su tells Firetails to attack, so it lunges at the panda, but before it could attack, the panda's horn begins to glow, and it shoots a laser that hits Su in the chest. All the color begins to drain from Su's body, and he has no idea what's going on, but a few moments later, the panda then fires a laser at Fawn. Fawn tries his best to dodge, but despite his best efforts, the laser still touches his hair, so he warns everyone else to go and hide before they get hit too. Fawn's body then begins to develop purple patches, and he is worried that he might have been poisoned, so he quickly summons Juan and asks him to use his detoxifying urine skill. Juan is confused because he doesn't see anything wrong with Fawn, but he does as instructed anyway and splashes Fawn in the face. However, the detoxifying urine seems to have no effect, so Fawn just took a face full of piss for nothing. The panda then fires another laser aimed at the Firetails, and it looks like it left a severe wound, but when Su goes to check on his pet, he realizes there isn't actually any damage. It's more like someone painted over his pet's body, and it's the same with Fawn because despite looking poisoned, he feels perfectly fine. He soon realizes that the panda's ability is to absorb colors and create illusions to distract its enemies, and while that doesn't sound too dangerous at first, it's really hard to keep track of your opponent when they are able to camouflage themselves perfectly. On the bright side, since the color changing doesn't do any damage, they just need to worry about avoiding the panda's melee attacks. Sue tells Fairy Tails to keep dodging the panda's attacks, but then the panda makes his bamboo invisible, so Fire Tails isn't able to see it in time to dodge. Sue is worried about Fire Tails' safety, so he asks Fawn for some help and promises to share the panda with him equally. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Fawn doesn't trust Sue, but he decides to help him anyway, so he asks Fawn to splash the panda with his feeble pea. The pea should have weakened the panda, so Fawn summons Cactus and asks it to bind the panda. However, they soon realize it was an illusion, and the real panda comes out of nowhere to kick the cactus away. It then creates a blinding flash of light with its horn, and by the time Fawn and Sue can see again, the panda has disappeared. They both stay alert since the panda might be hiding with his color control again, and as soon as Fire Tails spots something moving, it jumps into attack. However, it turned out to be a trap, and a second later, the panda drops from the ceiling to smash Fire Tails into the ground. It then uses its ultimate technique and shifts the color in the room to overload Fawn and Sue's brains. And while they are confused, it proceeds to beat them up, but Tuan still doesn't understand what's going on. Anyone caught in the panda's range should be disoriented by the shifting colors, but Tuan is color blind, so to him it looks like Fawn and Sue are just messing around. It eventually gets tired of watching its master lose to a panda, so while the panda isn't watching, Juan sneaks up from behind and smacks it in the head. And once the panda is on the ground, he pees on it to assert dominance. Fawn is shocked that Juan was able to beat the panda so easily, but he is glad that they finally caught the Lord. However, a moment later, Sue grabs the panda and starts running away. Fawn and the others chase after it, but Sue pulls out a dandelion pet and uses it to fly away, so there's no way they'll be able to catch him now. Fawn is disappointed that they wasted so much effort today and another Lord won't spawn here for a long time, so he suggests they just go to the market tomorrow to find some pets for everyone. Later that night, Sue carries the panda to the Temple of the East Sect, and as he arrives at the gate, he tells the guard that he is here to see Mr. Yo. The guard leads Sue to Yo, and Yo is pleasantly surprised that Sue was capable of capturing a lord all on his own. However, Sue didn't come here for empty compliments, he just wants Yo to keep his end of the bargain and release his pet. While Sue isn't paying attention, something seems to slip into his shadow, but he is too focused on Yo to notice. Yo tells his men to bring out the Ice Tails, and Sue is glad to see his pet again, but as soon as he tries to free Ice Tails, Yo's men try to capture Fire Tails. Sue demands to know what's going on here because this wasn't part of the deal, but Yo never intended to let Sue reclaim his Ice Tails. He orders his men to capture Sue, but Sue isn't a weakling, so he's able to fight them off with the help of Fire Tails. However, Yo then summons his pet, and from Sue's shadow, a giant figure emerges before slamming Sue's face into the ground. The next day, Fawn and the others head into town to buy a pet, but while Fawn is busy doing something else, the others spot a wanted poster for Liu Fengmeng in the middle of town. Gu tries to remain positive and says it might not be the same Liu who's helping them, so it would be best to keep it a secret for now and watch what he does to see if he really is a dangerous criminal. Just then, Fawn returns to the group and sees them huddled around the notice board, so he asks if something is wrong, and they all get startled. Everyone tells him they are fine though, and Fawn sees no reason to question it, so he tells everyone to hurry up so they can go buy some pets. But first they need money, so they head to the bank and Gu performs the pavilion's dance to access their account. But to her dismay, the teller tells her that someone withdrew all their money a few days ago. Gu breaks down in tears because she can't believe they got robbed of all their money, but then Fawn remembers that he was the one who withdrew that money when he was first reincarnated. Luckily, he didn't spend all of it, so he tells Gu he has some money they can use to shop for pets, although he decides to leave out the part about how he got it. The four of them then head out into the market, and as soon as they get there, Gu falls in love with this scent skipper. She thinks it's really cute, but it costs 20 tal, and they can't afford that right now. Yui immediately enters haggling mode and starts badgering the shopkeeper to reduce the price by calling the scent skippers ugly, dull, and useless. Eventually, she does manage to get a good deal for it, but at the cost of the scent skipper's self-confidence. After seeing Yui work her magic, Axe asks her for some help because she wants to get one of these pets, and with how goofy they look, Yui has all the ammunition she needs to bargain. Now both Axe and Gu have pets, but Yui hasn't chosen anything for herself yet, so they continue walking around the market. Suddenly, a man calls out to Yui and offers to sell her a new pet he just acquired, but the group immediately recognizes it as the panda that Su stole from them yesterday. That panda is rightfully theirs, so Fu demands that the shopkeeper return it immediately, but while the shopkeeper knows it's a stolen pet, he isn't worried because he recognizes the uniform of the Lianjiao Pavilion and he knows they are too weak to be a threat to him. He is part of the East Sect under Yo, and this isn't the first time the East Sect has robbed the pavilion, so Gu is starting to get angry. But the shopkeeper tells her she can't attack him because it's against the League's rules to use pets in public. That may be true, but the rules don't say anything about using a pet that doesn't have a master yet, so Xia approaches the panda and gives it an idea. After a few moments, she gets the shopkeeper's attention and tells him that the panda managed to escape while he was arguing with Gu, and the keeper starts panicking because Yo would kill him if he found out he lost the panda lord. He opens the cage to try to go after it, but when he tries crawling into the hole, he realizes it was all an illusion and the panda is still inside the cage. And as you can imagine, it is not happy. The shopkeeper gets knocked out in one punch, but the panda is still dangerous, so Fawn is worried it might hurt someone. However, Yui tells him he doesn't need to worry. She approaches the panda and tells him the story of how her sect has fallen into ruin, and the entire time she was powerless to help her friends. So she asks him to become her spiritual pet so they can both get strong together. The panda sympathizes with her, so it agrees to become Yui's pet. But this is the first pet Yui has ever had, and she isn't familiar with the bonding process, so Gu explains how it's done and shows her the correct position. Once the ritual is complete, Yui has officially bonded with the panda lord and Fawn is happy for her, but a moment later, he notices Firetails tied up in the shop. From what he recalls, Su really cared about Firetails, so Fawn finds it hard to believe that Su would sell his pet so easily. Fawn releases the Fire and Ice Tails, and they tell him that Su was captured and is being held hostage. Kexi asks Fawn if they should try to save him, but the East Sect is a lot stronger than they are, and their leader is as strong as a spirit general, so they are severely outmatched. However, Fawn says he knows of a way that they can beat the East Sect, so he tells everyone they should head home because he has something he wants to show them. Before Fawn died, he had hidden several upgrade pills under a tree, and with these pills, everyone will be able to make their pets stronger. Meanwhile, over in Yo's sect, Su is chained up and is being tortured in order to force him to dissolve the contract he has with his pets. But even if Su were to do what Yo wants, he knows he would still be killed regardless. That same night, Fawn and the others begin their raid and Su can hear all the commotion outside, but he has no idea what's going on. Eventually, Fawn's group arrives at Su's cell, and they are here to bust him out. After releasing Su, Fire and Ice Tails run over to him, and he is so glad to see that they are okay. But he doesn't understand why Fawn would go so far to help him. However, Fawn simply tells him that they are here on a mission today and Su is pretty strong, so they could really use his help. That's all Su needed to hear, so he grabs his shirt, and everyone heads out to raid the East Sect. A little while later, Yo arrives and finds a bunch of his guards beaten up on the floor. The guard tells him they are being raided, and Yo is surprised that someone was bold enough to raid his sect. Fawn is currently looking for Yo so he can challenge him, but he accidentally stumbles across Yo's treasure room instead, and this is honestly way better. There are a ton of rare things here, including rare antiques, advanced scrolls, and even upgrading material. This works out really well for Fawn since he can finally upgrade Teddy and Cactus out, but upgrades take a while, so he's going to have to wait until after he has defeated Yo. However, just then, Yo emerges from the shadows and tells Fawn he is willing to share those upgrade materials with him if he joins the East Sect. Fawn tells him he appreciates the offer, but he is already part of the Lianjiao Pavilion and he is here to avenge them. Yo tells Fawn that if he really wants to avenge the pavilion, then he should be going after the traitor who set up their master and got him killed. Fawn refuses to believe that one of his pavilion members really betrayed him, and Yo doesn't intend to waste any time convincing him, so he begins his attack and aims right for Fawn's eyes. Luckily, Cactus is able to pull him to safety, but Yo sends his shadow pet after him again. Fawn runs through the treasure room to try to get away from it, but the shadow is too fast, so he starts grabbing antiques off the shelves and throwing them at it. He wasn't expecting the antiques to do much, but to his surprise, the shadow actually stops chasing him because Yo cares a lot about these antiques, so he's putting them back on the shelves with him. That gives Fawn an idea, so he instructs Teddy to punch a vase off the top shelf, and when it's the floor, Yo screams because that thing cost him a ton of money. Right after that, Cactus jumps up onto a shelf and proceeds to pull it down onto Yo to bury him. But just when Fawn thought the fight was over, Yo's shadow stabs him through the chest. He realizes the shadow is too strong for him to defeat on his own, so he needs to regroup with Gu and the others as soon as possible. Gu's group has just finished releasing all the pets that Yo held captive, but then she hears an explosion coming from the area Fawn went to, and she is starting to get worried. Fawn eventually makes his way over to Goo's group, but he is heavily injured, so he asks the others to buy him some time while Goo's scent skipper heals him. Just then, Yu's shadow arrives and goes straight for Sue, but before Sue could be hurt, his Fire and Ice Tails jump in to save him. Fairy Tails tries to blast the shadow, but the shadow vanishes and then reappears behind Sue. It is about to knock Sue out, but Ice Tails shoots the shadow before its punch could land. The shadow then slinks away, so Fawn tells Yui to use her panda's light skill to weaken the shadow. It seems to work since the shadow is forced to back off and the scent skipper has finished healing Fawn, so he can finally rejoin the fight. However, his pets are still in the middle of the upgrade, so Fawn won't be able to use them for a while. The rest of the pets coordinate their attacks, and while Fire and Ice Tails restrain the shadow, Kite prepares to use Thornback as a kinetic bomb. However, Yo refuses to let his shadow be defeated so easily, as he awakens its second phase and covers the shadow in bone armor. The buff makes the shadow strong enough to break free from the twin tails, and it is easily able to knock out all the pets nearby. Now, everyone except Guling has been defeated, and since she is the master of the pavilion now, Yo is going to enjoy crushing her. The shadow raises its hand to attack, but just before it could slash Gu, it is stopped by Fawn's catfish. Fawn's pet upgrades are finally done, so Nyan has gotten a lot bigger and is more versatile in combat. Yo can't believe that he is really looking at catfish because they were all exterminated months ago, and Gu is just as surprised as Yo is because the only person she knows who can wield a catfish like this is her master. Fawn manages to push Yo's shadow back, so Yo switches tactics and decides to use ranged attacks. Nyan flies around to dodge the shadow spikes, but he eventually gets stabbed in the gills, and from there Yo's shadow pins him to the ground. This would normally be really bad for Nyan, but luckily, Fawn bought a bubble defense scroll a while ago, so he's able to push the shadow away, and at the same time, Fawn instructs Cactus to restrain the shadow, so vines emerge from the ground to hold him down. And now that the shadow is stuck in one place, Nyan can work his magic. He bites down on the shadow's head and begins sucking, but Yo knows what happens next, and he absolutely refuses to let Shadow get devoured. He tells Shadow to escape at any cost, so Shadow digs his claws into Nyan's sides, but Nyan keeps sucking like his life depends on it. Shadow tries anchoring itself to the ground, but Fawn already planned for this, so he tells Nyan to drag Shadow into the sky. Now Shadow has nothing to grab onto, so he is helplessly sucked into Nyan's belly. Shadow's physical form has been destroyed, but as long as his core remains, Yo will be able to resummon him, so they need to destroy it quickly. Sue sends Fire Tails after the core, but before it could be destroyed, Yo uses what's left of Shadow to punch Fire Tails away. The core is damaged in the process, but is still in one piece, so Fawn and Nyan start running over to smash it. However, before they could do that, two shadowy hands emerge and pin them to the ground. Fawn has no strength left in him, and if Yo manages to resummon Shadow, then all they are doomed because everyone has been knocked out. But just as Yo is about to summon Shadow again, that girl Fawn saved in town shows up out of nowhere and smashes the core. She's a little confused since she doesn't know what's going on here, but Yo attacks her, so she sidekicks him with her hoof. And if you've ever been kicked by a deer, you know Yo just lost a bunch of teeth and ruptured his spleen. The girl has been following Fawn ever since he saved her because she is grateful, but also because she has a crush on Fawn. However, she is too shy to admit that, so she covers her face and runs into the forest, leaving Fawn very confused. A little while later, everyone wakes up, so they begin gathering all of Yo's treasure, but Sue gets a little greedy and demands 70% of the profit for himself. Luckily, after Fawn upgraded Teddy, he unlocked a new ability, Amnesia Piss, so Fawn sprays Sue with it, and he suddenly forgets what he was talking about. She then convinces him that he agreed to give up his share of the loot as an apology for stealing the panda last time, and Sue doesn't question it. Now that that's been settled, Fawn tells everyone to go pick out any suitable pets from Yo's collection. Just then, Fawn finds a fire steel ball, and he thinks it would suit him well, so he prepares to form a contract with it. For some reason, he faces some resistance, but with his mastery of pet bonding, he is eventually able to form the contract. However, moments later, Fawn feels a strange pressure within his body and collapses to the ground. The others rush over to check on him, and the next morning, Fawn wakes up in his bed with She standing over him. She got really worried when Fawn collapsed out of nowhere, but since he's awake now, She and Yui are going to make him a good meal to restore his strength. Fawn doesn't understand what happened to him earlier, but he remembers being attacked by a strange force right after he tamed the steel ball. That aside, he is glad they managed to acquire all those upgrading materials from the East Sect, because now everyone's pets will be able to level up. Speaking of which, he recalls that catfishes get a storage space when they level up, so he asks Nyan to take him inside because he wants to check out how big it is. Nyan is happy to oblige, so he swallows Fawn, and Fawn is pleased with how it looks. With this rate of growth, everyone's pets should be able to reach the third stage of soul bonding before they D-rank sect assessment in a few months. But before all that, Fawn needs to figure out who the traitor who sabotaged him in his past life was. There's no way it was Gu Ling or the others here, so he believes it must be someone outside his sect who betrayed him. But until he figures out who that person is, he's going to have to stay on guard. Just then, Fawn recalls that he used Nyan in front of Gu, so he should probably go talk to her about it. He finds Gu out in the shrine she made to honor her deceased master, and she apologizes for making Fawn put in so much work for the good of the pavilion when he is still a newcomer. But ever since Fawn joined them, she feels like they might truly be able to restore the pavilion to its former glory. Fawn tells her that he didn't do anything on his own and it was all a team effort, but that aside, there's something he needs to talk to her about. Fawn explains the whole story about the catfish and how he acquired it, but he leaves out the part about him being her reincarnated master. Gu admits that she was shocked when she saw him using a catfish, but putting that aside for now, there's something she wants to show him. She pulls out the wanted poster she saw in town and asks Fawn if it is really true that he's a lecherous chest grabber. Fawn was really hoping he could just forget the whole incident with Bai, but he still has no idea what Liu did to make her so mad. He swears to Gu that he isn't a pervert, and this whole thing is just a huge misunderstanding. And Gu believes him because he has proven himself to be a trustworthy ally. He has been here for several days now, and Fawn hasn't exhibited any degenerate behavior. And she feels like she has known him for years, even though they just met. The way Fawn behaves, the way he handles enemies, and the way he controls his catfish all reminds her of her master, and she knows the similarities are no mere coincidence, so she asks Fawn to tell her the truth. She wants to know if he's her master. She and Yui are listening in on the conversation, but they only heard the part about Fawn possibly being a chest fondler, so they are waiting to see what happens. Meanwhile, Fawn is contemplating whether he should tell Gu the truth or not. He still hasn't figured out who the traitor was, and until then it would be dangerous to reveal his identity. So he decides to keep it a secret, and to convince Gu that he isn't her master, he grabs her by the shoulders and says he is Chronic Gunner. As soon as Yui and Shai hear that, they barge into the room and tie Fawn up for his behavior. He really wishes he didn't have to ruin his image like that, but at least this way his secret is safe, so he can continue investigating. She then takes him away so he can reflect on his actions, and Yui asks Gu if she really thinks Fawn is related to their master somehow. Gu admits that she thought that initially, but if Fawn really is a degenerate, then there's no way he could have anything to do with their master. Regardless, their priority right now should be to prepare for the D-Class promotion tournament, because they need to advance their sect. A few days later, it is finally time for the tournament, and the group is going to be traveling on these pigs, and she seems enthusiastic, but she has never ridden one before, so she ends up crashing into a tree. Gu apologizes for not being able to arrange better transportation for the group, but their budget is really tight, so this is the best they've got. They eventually get on the road, and they are all pretty nervous since they've been working hard to prepare themselves for this day. All the plane factions are going to gather on the competition island, and normally only around 4 or 5 plane factions participate each year. Just then, Fawn notices someone following them, but it turns out that it's just that sheep girl from before. She has been spying on Fawn for a while now, but whenever Gu tried to talk to her, she would get embarrassed and run away. Gu assumes the girl is just really shy, and there's no need to be concerned about her following them, so they continue traveling to the examination center. Once they arrive at the center, they are surprised to see so many people gathered here. As they walk up to the registration desk, all the other participants begin insulting them, and it's really starting to get on Xi's nerves, but Gu tells her to just ignore them. They eventually make it to the registration desk, and Gu is pleasantly surprised to find out that the examiner is an old friend of hers, Master Li. Li is just as happy to see her, and Gu walks up to register. But before that, she asks why there are so many participants this year. Li tells her it's because of the pavilion, but Gu doesn't understand what he's talking about, so Li explains that after the Lianzhou pavilion's decline, a lot of its resources were stolen by the various unknown factions of criminals. And thanks to the materials they stole, they were able to qualify for the promotion exam. The criminals shamelessly mock the pavilion for being such an easy target, but Li tells everyone to shut up. He then addresses Gu, and as much as he hates to say this, there are only 8 spots on the roster, so if Gu wants the pavilion to participate in the tournament, then they are going to have to fight with the other factions to decide who gets to qualify. All the factions there begin laughing at the pavilion because they believe its members are too insignificant to put up a decent fight, especially with a weakling like Gu as their master. However, Fawn gets in front of her and asks if she remembers the names of the factions they robbed the pavilion. Gu tells him it was the Hongfu, Guangshao, Shengnan, and Yayang were responsible, so Fawn calls them out. Fawn remembers the Hongfu faction and its leader in particular, Wang Fuge. A couple of years ago, the Hongfu faction got robbed, so Wang came to Fan begging for assistance. If it weren't for Fan's kindness towards Wang, the Hongfu faction wouldn't exist today, but Wang couldn't care less. Running a faction is a cruel business, and hair replacement surgery isn't going to pay for itself, so he's got to do what he's got to do. And as soon as he saw an opportunity to rob the pavilion, he did so with no remorse. Fan is disappointed that Wang would stoop so low, but hearing him talk about it so shamelessly makes it a lot easier for Fan to take his revenge. Fan summons Teddy, and all the opposing factions are shocked because Teddy is level 8. They had thought the pavilion wouldn't have any strong pets left. Wang encourages his men to stay focused because a single dog can't beat all 3 of them. However, a moment later, all their pets get grabbed by an uprated cactus's vines, and Teddy seizes the opportunity to run up and pee on Wang. And with Teddy's new level, he unlocked Poison Pea, so Wang doesn't have long before it takes effect. He starts calling over to the other criminal factions to help him take Fan down. But to his dismay, he finds out that all the pavilion members have leveled up their pets and were able to easily defeat the other factions. Fan then grabs Wang by the shirt and demands that he, along with all the other factions that robbed the pavilion, must return everything they stole with 200% interest. The other factions' leaders are so scared that they immediately agree to pay the pavilion, and Wang says he is even willing to become Fan's hype man just so Fan will undo the poison. Fan is starting to feel bad because Wang looks even uglier with purple duck lips, so he throws him to the ground and tells Teddy to spray him with some detoxifying pee. Lee is truly impressed by the strength of the pavilion, and since those 4 problematic factions have dropped out of the tournament, the pavilion has secured its spot on the roster. The factions that will proceed from this center will be the Lianxiao Pavilion, Wanwu Gate, and Beimu Study. Just then, Shai realizes that Su is here, and she is shocked that he's a member of the Beimu Study. Even Fan thought Su was a factionless trainer, but Su proudly states that it's perfectly natural for someone as strong as him to join a faction. But he is a bit surprised by how much Fan and the others have improved since the last time he saw them. He acknowledges that they are strong, so he asks if they would be willing to form an alliance with his faction. As soon as he says this, the leader of the Wangu faction recognizes an opportunity to make strong allies, so he offers an alliance as well. However, Su rejects him because he thinks the Wangu faction is too weak. This gets the Wangu leader mad, and Fan chooses to stay out of it because he would rather not make enemies before the tournament even begins. Just then, the master of the Beimu Study tells Su to shut up, and Su immediately stops trash-talking because he doesn't want to upset her. Fan is intrigued by the fact that the master of the Beimu faction is an old lady, but she seems pretty powerful, so he can't afford to underestimate her. The participants are all informed that they need to head to the tournament island soon, so they should get on their respective catfins, and a second later, a catfins lands in front of the pavilion members. Yuri is freaking out because she has never had to ride a pet as big as this before, but the others don't seem to have much trouble with it. After arriving on the island, they are greeted by another examiner named Lu, and she is surprised to see that the pavilion is here. Lei explains that they will be participating in this year's tournament, and that Gu has become the new master of the pavilion, so Lu rushes over to tell Gu that she's a huge fan of the pavilion. It rose to power so quickly under Master Fan's leadership, and he was always able to defeat his opponents with overwhelming skill. But it's a shame that the pavilion declined after his death. Gu tells Lu that they are here to restore the pavilion to its former glory, and Lu is glad to hear that, so she wishes Gu and the others good luck. The leader of the Wangu faction doesn't think it's fair that the examiners already like the pavilion so much, but it would be best for him to get on the pavilion's good side since they seem strong. A little while later, Lu gathers everyone and tells them she's about to hand out an item that's very important for the tournament. She pulls the rings off one of her pets and puts it on Gu's wrist. She then explains that it is a new pet developed by the League. It's called a Consonance, and when a player wears a bracelet from the Consonance's head, it is able to collect real-time data, allowing the examiners to keep track of each player. She informs everyone that there are 3 rules in this tournament. You must wear your bracelet at all times, you can't fall in the water, or you're disqualified, and it is forbidden to attack anyone who has surrendered. Breaking any of the rules will result in immediate disqualification. And now that everyone is clear on that, it is time for them to be taken to their starting locations. The test will be beginning soon, so Lu is going to have to leave the island. But before she goes, she tells Gu that she sincerely hopes the pavilion can make a comeback. Meanwhile, the Bai family is heading for the examination center, and once they arrive, Bai Tanshu greets Lord Li. Tanshu is a supervisor of the competition, so he apologizes for being late. He also brought his little sister, Bai Liansu, with him because she said she wants to observe. Liansu heard someone mention the Lianxiao Pavilion earlier, and she recalls that they used to be a B-class faction. But it's pitiful that they are now starting over from scratch. Lu doesn't trust the Bais because rumor has it that Master Fan's death was caused by someone related to them. However, Tanshu tells her that the rumors are not true. He is sure that his family would never do something as vile as to assassinate a master, and Lu begins apologizing profusely for saying such a thing about the Bai family. Tanshu tells her he doesn't mind since he understands where the rumors came from. At the time of the incident, both the Bai and Lianqiao factions were B-class, so it makes sense that people would think they were competing with each other. But Tanshu was lucky enough to get to face Master Fan in a duel before he died, and even though they were the same age, he was so strong that Tanshu stood no chance. He has nothing but respect for that man, so what happened to him was truly a shame. That aside, the competition is about to begin, so Li asks Tanshu to come outside to announce the beginning of the tournament. The island begins to transform, revealing a vast arena, and all the consonances are activated to keep track of the participants. A chunky consonance on top of the mountain then spits out a bunch of glowing orbs, and they are scattered all across the island. Li explains that there are 500 orbs in total, and participants will earn points for each one they collect. Once 300 have been collected, the next phase of the tournament will begin, but she is a little surprised that all they need to do is collect the orbs because it seems a little too easy. But when Gu placed one next to her ring, it is absorbed and a point is added to their total, so maybe it really is that easy. She then spots another orb nearby, so she goes to pick it up, but before she could grab it, a Gopher pet grabs it and runs away. The rest of the orbs across the island are also starting to disappear, so the other teams must have started collecting them as well. She is worried that if they don't act quickly, then all the orbs will be taken, so Fan comes up with a plan. Considering the fact that there are only 500 orbs on the island and the next phase will start once 300 orbs have been collected, then they need to gather 20 orbs to guarantee a spot at the top. That means each member needs to gather at least 5 orbs, and they'll all meet back here once the phase is over. Meanwhile, in the exam center, Tanshu and Liansu are walking around, and Liansu is impressed by how quickly the teams are collecting orbs. She is especially surprised by one team because a member has already gathered 18 orbs. It looks like this consonant's pet is for the Tianyuan sect, and Li thinks they are quite interesting because they've been using a loophole in the rules to gather orbs quickly. That red symbol on the consonants means they've removed their rings, and according to the rules, as long as they put it back on within 3 minutes, they won't be disqualified. Once the Tianyuan group figured out the loophole, they gave their rings to their pets so they could gather the orbs for them, and it has been working out great for them. Just then, a man named Sheng Liao shows up holding all their pets, and he's got whatever this is for a pet, so he is able to wipe out all the members of the Tianyuan sect. Over in the control room, Liansu is shocked to see that all the members of the Tianyuan sect were eliminated at the same time. According to the consonances, the reason for the Tianyuan's elimination was because they didn't put their rings back on in time, but given how smart they were with the loophole, Li doesn't think they could have messed up the timing. He believes they might have been attacked, so he sends 2 examiners out to check on the situation. Meanwhile, Fan is busy collecting orbs with Teddy and Cactus, but after he absorbs one, a team nearby notices him, so he has to hide. The team belongs to the Hongluan sect, and Fan recalls that it's the same sect that Xu belongs to, so they might know Liu. Just then, Teddy runs out and starts licking the girl on the team because he recognizes her, and the girl recognizes Teddy as Liu's dog, so she knows he must be nearby and yells for him to come out. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Guling has just found an orb, but as soon as she picks it up, she gets jumped by a sect, and it looks like Duan Yi is a member. Gu is glad to see Duan again and asks him what he is doing here, but before that, he clarifies that he isn't a member of this loser faction. The 2 attackers tell Duan that they saw Gu first, so he had better get out of here unless he wants to become their next target, but Duan completely ignores them and continues chatting with Gu because it has been a while since he last saw her. The 2 nature faction members are now infuriated, so one of them summons a pet and tells it to attack, but before it could even do anything, it is torn to shreds by Duan's pet. Gu recognizes those paws and tails, and she is delighted to find out that Hemi is still alive, so she runs over to see her. However, as she gets closer, she realizes that something is really wrong. For some reason, Hemi looks like a decaying corpse, but she doesn't have any time to ask Duan about it because the nature faction members launch another attack. Gu yells to warn Duan, but he's already aware and takes control of Hemi to obliterate nature's pets in brutal fashion. He then instructs Hemi to attack the faction members, and the 2 of them are terrified, so they immediately surrender. And according to the rules, Duan isn't allowed to hurt them once they surrender, but the rules don't say anything about scaring them, so Duan has Hemi launch a harmless blast near their faces. Once the message has been sent, Hemi walks away and starts eating the remains of the pets she killed. Gu asks Duan what happened to Hemi, but Duan tells her it's pretty obvious. Jaime was revived thanks to the power of the Rakshas faction that Doowon joined. He also tells Gu that there's no need for her to continue to struggle as part of the pavilion because he can get her a spot as a member of the Rakshas faction alongside him. But instead, Gu asks Doowon to come back to the pavilion because thanks to their new member, they have a good chance of returning to their former glory. Doowon scoffs at the idea, but Gu tells him she is serious. In fact, after a single month of training with Liu, everyone at the pavilion was able to level up their pets to the soul-building stage. But Doowon doesn't think it's all that impressive. He says Liu is just a cunning outsider, and there's no way they could rejuvenate the pavilion with a few random pets. Gu admits that it will be difficult, but if Doowon were to come back, she's sure they could make it work. However, Doowon never wants to be associated with the pavilion again. He's not going to fight Gu in this tournament out of courtesy for everything they've been through together, but from this moment on, he thinks of her as nothing more than a stranger. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Shai and Thorn have just found their fourth orb, and Shai is really excited, but he is also upset because even though Thorn is in the 6th soul-building stage, he's still got that goofy look on his face. If it doesn't change soon, then people won't take him seriously when he becomes rich and powerful. While Shai was busy contemplating whether he should get a new pet to replace Thorn, Thorn went out to go grab the orb. Shai tries to stop him at first because there could be something nearby waiting to ambush them, but a few seconds pass and no one shows up, so Shai thinks it's safe. But as soon as he's about to absorb the orb, a boy comes out of nowhere and demands that he hand it over. Shai does a quick height check and determines that the boy must be a lot younger than him, so he wonders how he got here. He asks him if he's an examiner's little brother or something, but Nishin informs him that he is the master of the super cool Invincible Temple faction. Shai finds it hard to take him seriously when his faction has such a childish name, so he figures he must just be a weak kid who's calling himself the faction leader. He absorbs the orb right in front of Nishin and tells him there's nothing he can do about it. But a second later, Nishin's body starts glowing and Shai realizes he might have messed up. The energy from Nishin's summoned pet can be seen all across the island, and before long, an Emperor-class dragon descends from the sky. It is so spectacular that it even garners the governor's attention, so he pulls Nishin's file and finds out that he's a part of the 8th region. He asks the 8th region representatives if they know who he is, and after thinking about it, they realize it must be Nishin Lone. They signed the participation form for him, but they thought he was just joking because the name he chose for his faction sounded ridiculous. And besides, it's really hard for a child to cultivate, so his spiritual pet pool shouldn't be large enough to contain an emperor pet. However, Tanshu tells them there's a way to make it happen. It is a procedure called Spiritual Pet Accompany, and if a trainer is talented enough, then when he is little, a pet embryo is implanted into his spiritual pool directly. This creates an unbreakable bond between the pet and trainer, so the pet's strength isn't limited to the size of the trainer's spiritual pool. Liansu had no idea something like that was even possible, so she asks why she didn't get a pet accompany when she was little, but Tanshu reiterates that the trainer needs to be very talented for the procedure to succeed, and Liansu is mid at best. Besides, conditions for a successful pet accompany are very strict and strenuous, so it is very rare for it to actually succeed. But what puzzles Tanshu the most about this is the fact that Nishin was able to achieve a pet accompany without being part of a prominent faction. He is certain that Nishin must be a very interesting boy, and right now, Shai has to face him in battle. Shai immediately recognizes Nishin's pet as a spiritual pet accompany, and seeing it brings back traumatic memories from his childhood. His family tried to perform the procedure on him when he was little, but Shai didn't have the talent to complete it successfully, so he had to suffer through countless excruciating failures. He was called a waste over and over by people who saw him as nothing more than a host, and even Shai's father turned his back on him because of it. Now Shai is faced with the embodiment of everything he failed to become, and it is incredibly frustrating, but he vows to prove that he can still become great without a pet accompany, and he will do it by defeating Nishin. Nishin accepts the challenge and sends his dragon after Shai, so Shai grabs Thorn and tries to jump out of the way. Meanwhile, in the control room, Liansu asks her brother if there's even a point to this competition, since it's obvious that an emperor pet would outclass every other pet on the island. But Tanshu tells her it's not that simple. There is one major fault with pet accompany, and that's the fact that pet's growth is closely tied to its master's cultivation. And generally, children are high-level cultivators, so Nishin most likely hasn't mastered proper control over his dragon yet. Back to the fight. It looks like Tanshu was right because Nishin's attack completely missed Shai, and the dragon ended up crashing into the ground. Nishin gets annoyed and starts yelling at Scale for messing up such a straightforward attack, but Scale starts yelling back at him because Nishin's instructions were more confusing than rocket science. The two then start going back and forth over whose fault this is, completely forgetting that they are supposed to be fighting Shai. Shai decides to seize the opportunity to launch a surprise attack, so he has Thorn enchant a rock, and after throwing it in the air, he launches several rock shards at Nishin. Nishin and Scale instantly stop arguing, and Scale fires a blast to destroy the spikes before they hit Nishin. But in the process, he also accidentally hits the island, and the lion turtle is not happy about that. Shai uses the momentary distraction to sneak up behind Nishin, and he's about to land a punch on him, but Nishin has a trick up his sleeve. He asks Scale to give him 5 points of strength, and his eyes suddenly begin glowing. Nishin's strength suddenly rises dramatically, so he is able to blow Shai away. But Shai doesn't understand how a trainer could possibly have so much strength. Nishin is proud of himself because this is one of the special abilities of an Emperor pet that he recently unlocked, and it boosts him so much that he is now stronger than Thorn, so nothing he does will hurt Nishin anymore. Shai tries to punch Nishin while he's gloating about his strength, but Nishin easily grabs his hand and punches Shai away. However, Shai refuses to give up, so he and Thorn begin attacking at the same time to try to overwhelm Nishin. But no matter how many times he tries, Nishin is simply too strong for him to defeat. Eventually, Nishin starts wondering why Shai refuses to give up because it's clear he can't win, but Shai was just buying time because he realized the technique Nishin is using must have a time limit, and as soon as Nishin runs out of energy, Shai launches an attack with Thorn. Unfortunately, there's no limit on how many times Nishin can reactivate the techniques, so as soon as he spots Thorn heading his way, he asks Scale to give him 10 more points of strength, and this raises his power so much that he is able to knock Thorn out in one punch. However, he's not done yet. He doesn't want to give Thorn a chance to recover, so he hits him with a hammer fist and then goes to land a killing blow on Shai. But a man suddenly yells for Nishin to stop, so Nishin pulls his punch back an inch away from Shai's face, and from the force behind it, Shai definitely would have died if it connected. Nishin whines to his dad that it's not fair to interrupt his fight out of nowhere, but his dad points out that Nishin was totally about to murder that poor boy. Plus, summoning Scale came with a whole intro animation, so Nishin has most likely drawn the attention of everyone on the island by now. Nishin tries to defend himself and says Shai was being really annoying, so Nishin's dad goes up to Shai and attempts to resolve this peacefully. He tells Shai that he must have realized the difference in their strength by now, so he should understand that there's no way he can win. He promises to let Shai live if he surrenders right now, but Shai knows the man doesn't really want to kill anyone, so he says he would rather die than surrender. Nishin begins laughing at his dad because Shai just called his bluff and his dad doesn't know what to do at this point, so he decides to just leave Shai alone so he and Nishin can go gather more orbs. He asks Nishin how many orbs he has managed to gather so far, and Nishin proudly shows him that he has gotten one. Nishin's dad begins raising his hand, and when Shai sees this, years of trauma from his dad beating him come flooding back, so he thinks Nishin's dad is about to hit him for only having one orb. However, Nishin's dad is actually a good father, so instead he congratulates Nishin for managing to get an orb, and Nishin seems really happy. Seeing this makes Shai really sad and jealous because not only did Nishin possess the power he failed to acquire when he was a kid, but he also has a loving father, so Shai is taking a lot of L's today. Thorn can see that he's upset, so he tries cheering him up, and Shai realizes there's no point in wallowing in self-pity, so he gets up and tells Nishin that he will become strong enough to beat him one day. And Nishin promises to give him a rematch whenever he wants. Meanwhile, Yui and Panda haven't had much trouble on their end so far. Thanks to Panda's help, she has successfully gathered all the orbs she needs, so while the panda may seem a little grumpy, she thinks he is very reliable. Just then, she notices a few orb lights disappearing one after another, meaning someone must be over there collecting them. Yui briefly considers confronting them, but she has collected enough orbs to pass the tests, so she doesn't want to risk getting into any fights. However, before she can leave, Panda has already started walking toward the opponents, so Yui has to follow him. Unfortunately, it turns out that there are 3 of them here, and Yui isn't confident that she can handle 3 people at once, so she's hesitant to attack. But Panda, on the other hand, is already out there demanding that the girls hand over their orbs. Yui thinks it's strange that the girls are all holding the orbs in their hands instead of absorbing it into their bracelets, since that's kind of the whole point of this challenge. But the girls still refuse to hand the orbs over, so Panda gets angry and attacks the one with green hair. This leaves the girls with no choice, so they all summon their pets and attack. Unfortunately, while their pets may be cute, they are also ridiculously weak, so Panda knocks them all out in an instant. Yui is starting to feel bad because the girls are now cowering in fear from Panda, but this is still a competition. So she tells them that if they hand over their orbs, then she will let them go. However, the girls beg her not to take their orbs because if she does, then their friend Yami will die. It sounds like the situation is really complicated, so Yui sits down with them so they can explain the whole story to her. The girls tell Yui that they are a new idol group from the Kinyu house, so their master asked them to join this competition as a publicity stunt. He arranged everything for them ahead of time and told them that simply joining would be enough, so they shouldn't worry about winning. However, they never expected the other pet masters here to be so malicious because even though the girls had nothing to offer, they were still attacked. And the pets they have are completely useless in a fight, so they were defenseless. And to make matters worse, an evil man kidnapped Yami and demanded that the rest of them bring him 5 orbs if they want to see her alive again. Yui has heard enough, so she asks the girls to show her where this evil man is so she can take care of him. The girls are thankful for Yui's help, so they lead her to the place where Yami is being held captive. When they arrive, the man is surprised to see that they've come back so soon, so he asks if they gathered the orbs he demanded. However, the girls show him that they only managed to gather 3 orbs instead of 5, so the man threatens to kill Yanmai right here for their failure. He orders his, whatever that is, to clamp down on Yanmai's head as hard as it can, but just before the man's pet could pop her head, the girls plead with him to stop because they know of a method that he can guarantee his victory. This gets the man's attention, so he stops squeezing Yami's head and watches eagerly as one of the girls reaches into her sleeve. However, that was just a distraction to buy enough time for Panda to sneak up on him, and Panda successfully manages to pull the pet away from Yami to keep her safe. Once the man realizes he is being attacked, he orders his pet to fight back against Panda, but with a single punch, Panda completely disintegrates the pet's entire body, leaving the man speechless. The girls begin to cheer because they think they've defeated the man, but the man still has a backup plan in place, so he points to Yami and tells everyone that he already implanted a spine-breaking worm in her neck, so if any of them make another move against him, then he will kill Yami instantly. Yami is clearly in a lot of pain, so for her safety, Yui is forced to stop attacking the man. The man now believes he has the upper hand, so he walks over to Yui and tells her that she can either watch Yami die, or they all let him implant worms in their necks so he can make them his tools. And if they are lucky, once the tournament is over, he may be willing to let them go. Maybe. He tells her hurry up and make a choice because he hasn't got all day, but those words send Yui into a flashback where she experienced something similar. Before she joined the pavilion, she and her former team had been massacred, but since she was still conscious, the one responsible decided to toy with her a little. He told Yui to choose one person who will get to leave here alive, one of her 2 friends or herself. Yui ended up choosing herself and she's felt guilty ever since for what happened that day, but she refuses to let the same thing happen again. Red energy begins flowing from Yui's body as she smacks the worm out of the man's hand, and before he can react, she twists his arm and squishes his head between her thighs to slam him into the ground. Yui eventually chokes the man out, so the worm he implanted in Yanmei's neck loses its grip and Panda is able to remove it without hurting her. The girls are all relieved that Yami is finally safe, so they run over to hug her. But when they turn to Yui to thank her for her help, they realize that there's something wrong with her because she mumbles the words, "Go away," and collapses on the floor. Seeing this, they all rush over to check on Yui, and when she finally wakes up, she seems fine, but she has no memory of what happened a few minutes ago. She asks the girls what happened to the man. So they explain that Yui knocked him out, and he probably won't be able to get up for a while. Yui is shocked to hear that she was the one who knocked him out because she doesn't remember doing that. But since the problem has been resolved, she really needs to get back to her team now, so she says goodbye to the girls. However, before she leaves, the girls ask her which faction she's part of, and after Yui informs them that she's a member of the Lianjiao Pavilion, they give her the orbs they collected and say they have a favor to ask. They don't intend to participate in the competition anymore, so once everything is over, they ask Yui to allow them to join the pavilion with her, and Yui would be more than happy to welcome them. Back in the control room, the governor is given a list of all the participating factions and their scores, and the Beacon Society is currently in first place. Liansu is curious what position the pavilion is in, so she asks about it, and she is told that the pavilion is in 7th place with 16 points, which is really impressive. However, there's also some bad news because when some instructors went to investigate the disappearance of the Tianyin faction, they discovered that they had all been killed. Liansu is shocked to hear this, but the governor is more so disappointed because he realizes that there is someone out there bending the rules to kill contestants without getting eliminated. If this goes on for much longer, more people could be put in danger, so he decides to begin the next stage of the tournament. Meanwhile, after Fawn met up with the girl from Liu's old faction, she started following him around all over the place, so Fawn asks her to just go back to her faction already and leave him alone. Jian begins pouting and says she's not here because of Fawn, she just hasn't gotten to play with Teddy in a long time, even though she also really wants to spend time with Fawn. Fawn can tell that Jian must care about Liu a lot, so he asks her what type of man she thinks he is, and after hearing him say this, Jian misunderstands the question, so she starts talking about all the dirty things she and Liu used to do in bed. This is really making Fawn really uncomfortable, so he backs away, but this confuses Jian since Liu would never act so shy around her. So Fawn makes up an excuse and tells her that he has been getting really bad headaches lately, so he lost a bunch of his memories and doesn't remember her well. Jian gets worried when she hears Fawn mention headaches because it sounds really similar to that weird disease that Liu used to have. This intrigues Fawn since it might explain the pain he has been feeling, so he grabs Jian by the shoulders and asks her to tell him all the details. However, touching her gets her flustered, so she goes red from embarrassment and punches him in the face. Jian later apologizes for hitting Fawn, but she says it's his fault because she never gave him permission to touch her, at least not until they are in private. Just then, Jian notices a pet sneaking up behind them, so Fawn turns around to prepare for an attack, but it turns out that it's only Firetails, so there's no need to be worried. Su then walks over and he's glad to see Fawn again, but then his master shows up at the top of a cliff and asks him if he has found any enemies yet. Stu tells her that there's no need to fight because these guys are his friends, but Fawn thinks it's a little weird that Su's entire faction is staying so close together since it is really inefficient. And while that may be true, Su tells him there are special circumstances that require them all to stay together, but he's not going to explain why. Just then, Su senses a terrifying presence approaching and he knows it's bad news, but it's too late to escape because Nising of the Beacon Society is already here. Su tells his master to wait a moment and let him do all the talking, so he then turns to Ni and politely asks if they can just leave. During this stage of the tournament, there's nothing to be gained by attacking other people because points can't be transferred and there are no orbs around here to acquire, so it would be pointless for them to fight right now. Su makes a good argument, so as much as Ni was looking forward to a good fight, he is reasonable enough to agree with Su. Su thanks him for understanding and says they are going to leave. But in a stroke bad luck, before they could leave, an announcement is made that the next phase of the tournament will now begin. And during this phase, points can be obtained by stealing the bracelets of other players, so Nei now has a reason to fight them. He jumps down from the cliff and lands right in front of Fawn and the others, but while Fawn is ready to fight, Jian and Su most certainly are not, so Su grabs his hand and starts dragging him away. Fawn asks why Su doesn't want to fight, so he explains that they would gain very little from fighting Nei, and he doesn't think they stand a chance against him anyway, so the best option is to run. Fawn asks if Nei is really that strong since he is sure that with Su's entire faction here, they should be able to defeat Nei. But about that, Su's faction isn't real. After Su and the others ran away, Nei turned his attention to Su's faction members, but as soon as he attacks, the two guys surrender. The old lady was about to surrender as well, but she got hit before she could finish saying the words, so her arm is broken. Nei can't believe all of them surrendered without even summoning a single pet, so he accuses them of mocking him. But the three plead with Nei to spare their lives because they aren't even real pet trainers. Meanwhile, Su is explaining to the others that he didn't have enough members to participate in the tournament, so he hired 3 people he found on the side of the road to pretend to be part of his faction. Fawn calls him an idiot because he just put innocent people in a lot of danger, and Su knows he messed up, but now all he can do is hope that the 3 of them can surrender in time before Nei does anything to them. At the same time, in the control room, Liansu asks the governor if he is trying to get the participants to kill each other, because a rule like this sounds like it will cause a lot of unnecessary deaths. However, the governor tells her that the point of this new rule isn't to make the participants fight each other. Back with Nei, he has taken the bracelets from all 3 of the fake faction members, but he is annoyed when he finds out that none of them had any points. The 3 explain that they gave all the orbs they found to Su, so he has all the points, and they beg Nei to just let him go because he has no use for them. However, Nei is so angry that he decides to kill the old lady for no reason at all. According to the governor, the point of this stage is to give the weaker factions a chance to surrender so only those with true determination will remain, but he failed to account for people like Nei who kill without remorse. And now, after dealing with Su's fake faction, he plans to target Su next. Now that the second phase has begun, all the pavilion members are gathering on a nearby cliff. Shai and Yui have already arrived, and a few minutes later, Fawn shows up as well, along with Su and Jian. Yui notices that the girl has been staring at Fawn for a while now, so she asks him who she is. Fawn introduces her as Jian Ruer from the Hongluan building, but before he can say anything more, she cuts him off and says she's his girlfriend. Fawn panics and tries to explain that it's a misunderstanding, but it's too late because the others already believe he and Jian are dating. They're very supportive. Just then, there is an announcement informing everyone that there are only 15 factions remaining in the tournament. A few moments later, the others see Gu approaching. Shai notices that she looks a little upset, so he asks her if she wasn't able to gather any orbs, but that's not the problem. Gu explains that she ran into Duwon and Jaime is apparently alive, but while that should be good news, Gu can't help but feel like something is wrong because Jaime looked weird. Her body was completely rotten, almost like a zombie, and as soon as Fawn hears this, it instantly reminds him of what happened to his whale in his past life. The faction Duwon joined must be involved in it somehow, so Fawn angrily demands to know where Duwon is. However, the others don't understand why he's so upset all of a sudden. Fawn gets a hold of himself and realizes he can't afford to lash out right now. He needs to focus on raising his rank first, so he can't let himself get riled up so easily. Since the second phase has already begun, they need to come up with a new strategy quickly. There are still 200 orbs scattered across the island right now, but it would be way too risky to split up and go collect them at this point. Su suggests that they all team up to steal the bracelets of other players and collect their points since that's the goal of this phase. But while that may be a good plan, Shai is against it because he doesn't trust Su and everyone knows it's against the rules to kill other trainers, so it'd be hard to get people to hand over their bracelets. However, Fawn has an idea and says that if they make some preparations in advance, then they'll be able to get the bracelets without having to kill anyone. A few minutes later, they drop a few orbs on the ground as bait, and within seconds, 2 members from the U2 sect show up. They are excited because they believe they have stumbled across some orbs that no one else has found, but they are still cautious, so one of them decides to send his pet out to retrieve the orbs. The wolf runs over to pick up all 3 orbs and brings them to its master, but when he tries to absorb the orbs, nothing happens. A moment later, the illusion fades and the man realizes that the 3 orbs were rocks all along, and to make matters worse, they have now been cornered by Fawn and the others. One of the men tries to call his wolf for help, but Thornback fires several spikes at it, and the wolf gets so scared that it starts running away. Unfortunately, it runs straight into Teddy's backside and gets hit with a stream of paralysis P. The other one tries to summon his pet to fight back, but before he could finish the hand sign, he gets grabbed by Vine and is slammed into the ground. The other guy tries to give up after seeing what they did to his friend, but it's too late because Vine also grabs him and slams him into the ground as well. Afterwards, Fawn walks up to them with Teddy in hand and sprays them both with some knockout P, and while they are unconscious, he removes the bracelets. One of them had 5 points while the other had 9, so Shai is really happy because the extra 9 points could help the pavilion get into the top 3. But Su reminds them that he helped come up with the plan too, so he wants a share of the points. While Su and Shai are busy arguing, Jian is standing off to the side since she isn't really interested in getting any points. But while everyone is distracted, she gets grabbed from behind by another one of those caterpillar things. The one responsible is the leader of the Baneful faction, and he has been watching them for a while now, waiting for the perfect chance to strike. And now that he has captured Jian, he orders everyone to give him their bracelets or else he will kill her on the spot. Yumi has first-hand experience with how that caterpillar's ability works, but there's no way for her to defeat it before it can kill Jian now. Su tries to bluff his way out of this and tells the leader that he chose the wrong person to take as a hostage because Jian isn't a part of the pavilion, and none of them care about what happens to her, but the leader isn't that gullible. He saw how friendly all of them were earlier, so even if she's not part of their faction, there's no way they'd be willing to let her die. Fawn steps up and says he is willing to hand over the 2 bracelets they just got if the leader releases Jian. There are 9 points in here, so it's not a bad deal for him, and Fawn even promises not to come after him if he agrees to the deal. Jian begins to blush because she didn't think Liu still cared about her this much, and the leader of the Baneful faction eventually agrees to the deal, so he tells Fawn to hand over the bracelets. Fawn does as he says and throws the bracelets over to the Baneful faction. Once they've gotten the points, he demands that they release Jian as promised. The leader agrees to release her, but first he says he's going to wait until he has gotten to a safe distance so Fawn and the others can't come after him. Fawn immediately refuses and demands that he release Jian right now, but the Baneful leader reminds them that Jian's life is still in his hands, so he can kill her if he wants to. Jian speaks up and apologizes for causing everyone so much trouble. She tells them that it's okay to let the leader take her, but Fawn doesn't think that's a good idea because the Baneful faction could betray them. However, Jian winks at Fawn and tells him to just trust her on this, so he reluctantly agrees to let the leader leave with Jian. But he swears that if the leader does anything to her, he's going to make sure that he and his entire sect burn to the ground. The leader tells the other 2 to stay here and make sure the pavilion members don't follow him, but even though Fawn agreed to this, he is still uneasy because he isn't sure what Jian is planning. Just then, an announcement is made informing everyone that Jian has been eliminated, and Fawn is enraged because he thinks they really did something to Jian. But a moment later, an announcement is made informing everyone that the Baneful faction's leader has been eliminated, and now Fawn has no idea what's going on. He tells the others to keep an eye on these two while he goes to check on Jian, but along the way, Jian finds him first and she seems perfectly fine. Earlier, while Jian and the leader were walking, she suddenly stopped and turned around. She thanks the leader because his kidnapping her made Fawn worry about her safety, but just because he has a bug on her head doesn't mean she's helpless. Jian begins summoning her pet, and before the leader can even react, he is mesmerized by what he sees. Jian's pet is called a Foxy, and unfortunately, I do not know where to get one. The leader is trying to stay strong and resist Foxy's charms, but all it takes is one kiss and the leader is hypnotized by her beauty. As a result, he drops the caterpillar and remains frozen in place, so Jian walks up beside him and says she surrenders. She never really had much interest in winning the competition anyway, so sees no reason to continue. And more importantly, according to the rules, now that she has surrendered, anyone who attacks her will automatically be disqualified, so while he is still hypnotized, she orders the leader to hit her on the head, causing him and his entire faction to be disqualified. Fawn had no idea that Jian was capable of that, but he's glad that she's alright. In fact, Jian is happier than ever because she knows Fawn was genuinely worried about her safety, and as thanks, she gives him the bracelet she got from the leader. Meanwhile, over in the control room, Liansu is puzzled when she sees that the entire Baneful faction has been eliminated. She asks the governor if they were all killed, but he points out the extra mark on their consoles and tells her that the faction was eliminated because their leader attacked someone who had surrendered. Afterwards, a few examiners are sent out to the island to retrieve those who got eliminated, but before Jian leaves, she apologizes to everyone for causing so much trouble. They all tell her that it's not a problem because thanks to her, they were able to gain so many points at once. Yui even invites Jian to come over to the pavilion for a celebration once the tournament is over. Jian says she's not sure Fawn would want her to come, but the others say there's no way Fawn would reject his girlfriend. It's too late for Fawn to tell everyone that Jian isn't his girlfriend, so he is forced to go along with it. Jian goes up to him and asks if he wants a goodbye kiss before she goes, but he frantically tells her that won't be necessary, so Jian gets on a griffin and leaves the island. As she is flying away, she thinks about how much Liu has changed since the last time she met him. It's almost like he's an entirely new person, but she still loves him, so she yells that she will stay by his side forever. Everyone snickers at Fawn and his lovely girlfriend, but he really doesn't want to talk about it, so he says they should start distributing the scores. Between the Yutu faction and the Baneful faction they defeated, they have gotten 26 points, and that combined with the 20 points they already have should be enough to put them in the top 3. But Su violently reminds them that he participated as well, so he wants at least 5 points for all the work he did. Once they've agreed on the point distribution, they all share the points, and over in the control room, Liansu is amazed because the pavilion's score suddenly rose by a lot. They now have 41 points, which puts them in second place behind the Beacon faction, and Tanshu is really happy to see that the pavilion is doing well. He believes they must have taken out the Yutu and Baneful factions to raise their score by so much, but to do so without any casualties is amazing. Liansu notices that one of the pavilion members has a lot more points than the others, so she asks about him, and Tanshu explains that it's a new member of the pavilion named Jun Yunzi. Since Liu Fengmeng is technically a wanted man, Fawn didn't want to use that name for the tournament, so he signed up as Jun Yunzi. Tanshu doesn't know much about Jun, but from what he has heard, he's a talented young man with great strength. After hearing all that, Liansu thinks Jun sounds like a great man, so she becomes excited and wants to meet him. She asks her brother if they can visit the pavilion after the competition is over, and since Tanshu is a fawn in the pavilion as well, he agrees, but he doesn't understand why she's so interested in visiting all of a sudden. Soon after, the current rankings are announced, placing the Beacon faction in first place with 54 points, the Pavilion in second with 45 points, and the Rakshas sect in third with 43 points. Duan is shocked to hear that his new sect has fallen behind the Pavilion, but he refuses to lose to them. Now that the second phase is over, it is announced that no one will be allowed to surrender from now on, and the final phase will begin soon. Back in the control room, Liansu notices that the island is sinking, so she asks the governor about it, and he explains to her that one of the rules of this tournament is that anyone who falls into the water will be eliminated. As such, participants will be forced to climb to the peak of the island to avoid getting submerged, which will cause them to clash more often. The entire island will be submerged within 2 hours, and the final rankings will be made based on the remaining teams and their scores. Back on the island, Fawn and the others are making a run for the hills to stay ahead of the rising water. But since surrendering is no longer allowed, the competition is a lot more dangerous than it was before, so he tells everyone to summon their pets and prepare for battle because they could be attacked at any moment. Just then, the group is attacked by a slash from Jaime, and Duan soon shows up along with his new faction. As soon as Fawn sees him, he demands to know what Doowon did to turn Jaime into a rotten monster, but Doowon tells Fawn he has no right to be asking questions when he's just a lowly newcomer. He then tells the others in his sect that he will be taking care of Gu and Shai so they can handle the rest of them. And while Fawn is distracted, a tentacle emerges from the water and grabs his ankle. It then flings him into the air and begins pulling Fawn down into the water, so he's in big trouble. Since the bracelet is what senses whether he is underwater or not, he takes it off and throws it over to Sue, so now he has 3 minutes to make it back to land before he is disqualified. As Fawn is pulled underwater, he comes face to face with a high-level octopus pet. But while most people would be mortified because this means certain doom, Fawn is actually excited because he finally has a chance to use Nian. This was the end of episode 8. Subscribe to not miss the next part.